Good morning, Ed.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning, Anissa.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning, counselors.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Let me just see how many folks we've got here already. All right, we're gonna go ahead and let me just make sure all my co-sponsors are here.
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started because we have all of our, not all of our panelists are here, but all of our lead sponsors on both of the hearing orders that we have are here, and I think folks are going to continue to show up as we go. Let me just actually. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. For the record, my name is Ricardo Arroyo. I'm the District 5 City Councilor. I'm also the chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Census and Redistricting. I'm joined by my colleagues, Ed Flynn, Andrea Campbell, Anissa Savi-George, Councilor Bach, Kenzie Bach, Councilor Liz Braden, Councilor Michelle Wu. I thought I saw Councilor Kim Janey, but I'm not actually sure if she's here yet. This hearing is being recorded and live streamed at the boston.gov City Council TV website. It will be rebroadcast on Comcast Channel 8, RCN Channel 82, Verizon Channel 1964. The Zoom link to provide public testimony for this hearing can be found by emailing Shane Pack, that's SHANE.PAC at boston.gov. Please make sure that when you come onto the Zoom that you state your full name. When you're called, please state your name and your neighborhood and limit your comments to 2 minutes to ensure that all comments and concerns can be heard. If you're unable to provide testimony today, you may submit written testimony or a 2-minute video for a record by emailing the committee at ccc.prt@boston.gov or filling out the form on our website within 48 hours following the hearing. Today's hearing is on docket 0280. It's an order for a hearing to discuss ways to promote a complete and accurate count for the 2020 census in the city of Boston. That's put together by lead sponsors Ed Flynn and Michelle Wu. And docket 0685, which is an order for a hearing to discuss and address the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on Boston's low 2020 census response rate and what plans are in place for being formed to improve them moving forward, which was co-sponsored and led by myself and Councilor and President Kim Janey. Our guest list for today is Sebastian Zapata, who's a senior analyst and census liaison for the city of Boston, Jeff Baylor, the regional director at the U.S. Census Bureau, Mark Liu, operations and development director at the Chinese Progressive Association, Cheryl Crawford, who's the executive director at Mass Vote, Taniqua Hines, who's a racial justice community advocate at the ACLU, Vatsadi Sivankhe, and if I mispronounce your names, please do correct me, director of organizing and census manager at the META Coalition, Beth Huang, director at the Mass Voter Table, Reverend Florissant, Fatima Ali Salam from the GMNC, the Greater Manhattan Neighborhood Council, Manila Mendez from NOAA, Patricia Montez from Centro Presente, Jelena Suggs from the Union Capital Boston, and Bernardo Diaz del Malgajas from the Brazilian Women Group. And as folks are here, we'll try and panel it. Some folks, hopefully, I do believe we had one cancellation, so we'll go through it as we go through it. I'm going to go ahead and go to Ed Flynn for opening.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Arroyo, Chair Arroyo, and to all the panelists that are here. Proud to partner with Councilor Arroyo, proud to partner with Councilor Wu, Councilor Janey on this important matter. As we know, a complete count of the 2020 census is critical in getting federal resources we desperately need for our communities. I'm glad we're having this timely conversation as we face additional barriers for getting a complete count because of the pandemic, the ongoing pandemic, and the Trump administration imposing measures that can impact our response rate. The data from the census determines our share of federal funding for education, healthcare, transportation, food access, so many other areas. Historically, our immigrant communities have been undercounted, whether it's due to language barriers or lack of awareness. So it's very important we continue to promote the census among our immigrant communities. I know Sebastian Zabata is here. He's done an excellent job. And let's continue to work together on reaching our immigrant neighbors. We work closely with the Chinese Progressive Association. I see my friend Mark Lowell, who works with Suzanne Lee and Karen Chen and so many great other leaders in the Chinatown and Asian community. But you are right, Councilor Arroyo. The negative comments made by the president about possibly having a sentence on the census about what your immigration status is has had a negative impact on people filling them out. Not only this time, but this goes back every 10 years. It's always been very difficult for the immigrant community to participate and at times to trust the federal government. Many think it impacts their immigration status. It could impact their assistance, food assistance programs, which it doesn't. But just that perception that it has an impact does impact people completing it. So it's important for us as government leaders to continue to stress that. Also, I want to say thank you to the panelists. And I was listening to 102.9 this morning, and Cheryl Crawford from Mass Vote was on. So I was learning a lot from Cheryl about the census as well. She was on with Councilor Mejia. So again, thank you, Councilor Arroyo, Councilor Janey, and proud to partner with Councilor Wu as well and continue to working with Sebastian and Mayor Walsh's office. Thank you.
Oh, Councilor Arroyo, you're on mute.
We got off to a great start this morning. Councilor Wu, if you would like to give an opening.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you to the chair and all of the co-sponsors, and of course the folks who have been working so hard on this for a long time. I know we've had many events as a city and in community groups and all across various communities to emphasize how important this is. But I just want to lift up what Councilor Flynn was just saying about the real piling on of barriers this particular census. We know why it matters. We know how this is about how we're valuing our communities and that it's so important for every person to count. But it is a lot to overcome right now, especially during the pandemic and the national situation. So looking forward to figuring out what concrete next steps are. I know some colleagues have proposed specific things, and then there are ways to talk about deadlines and resources and other changes. So here to listen and very grateful for everyone's leadership. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have a large panel, but I'd like to go to our councilors who are here if they would like to give an opening statement by order of arrival. Councilor Savi George.
Good morning, everyone. Because we have that large panel, I'm going to just listen in and appreciate everyone here this morning and the work that's ahead, and thank the sponsors and the chair for bringing us together this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really appreciative of having this hearing this morning. My district has a large number of residents who are historically undercounted, students and immigrants, and I'm really hopeful that we can, even though we're well into the process, that we can right the course of the ship here and get a good count in Boston, if we all figure it out. Thank you so much, despite all the impediments. And thank you also for all the folks who are going to be on the panels. I know they're working extraordinarily hard under very difficult circumstances. So thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braden. Councillor Bach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll also be brief. I'll just say, we're very concerned about this. I've got tracts in my district that are at as low as 32% response. And it's really bad for the city. It's bad for all our most vulnerable folks. I would just add to the normal hard to count populations in my district. We're really feeling the impact of, because the university's closed in March, losing a bunch of those folks. Although I want to thank the universities that have reported their on-campus and off-campus students. And then, and some folks who might have gone to stay somewhere outside of the city and missed the notice. And so I just, we're really needing to overcome a lot of barriers, even in places where typically we've had a higher count. So, we've been in my office doing a lot of outreach on the census, a bunch of multilingual outreach. And I just think that this is like an all hands on deck issue for all of us. So very grateful to the city and nonprofit partners. And to me, this is going to be a top, priority for all of us for the next 6 weeks and hopefully beyond, because it's crazy that we've had the period curtailed here, but we're in a strange and hard time. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Arroyo, and thank you to the makers for filing the hearing order. I also want to give a special shout out to Sebastian for the incredible work that he's doing on behalf of the administration. I also want to thank the mayor for his work with respect to this critical issue. There's been some really great work going on since the very beginning. Obviously, with all the new barriers with respect to the pandemic, economic loss, it is critically important, of course, that we partner with our community-based organizations who do the work every single day, but now, of course, understand the significance of the census and have shown up just remarkably. So thank you to all the panelists, but also to all the nonprofit partners who couldn't participate today. They're doing incredible work. I also want to thank the administration for getting really creative with respect to funding and granting these organizations resources to be able to do this work. It's one thing to say, go do it. It's another thing to make sure that they have resources to be able to do it. I also, represent largely my biggest neighborhoods are Dorchester and Mattapan. This is, of course, where some of the most hardest the populations that are hardest to count live and reside and work. So of course, want to continue to be a partner in this work. I co-chair one of the committees for the census for the administration with China Tyler. But we know that government officials can only do so much. So again, thank you to the community-based organizations. Lastly, I'll say it's not just about making sure that we get people counted for the monies and the resources that will come to the city of Boston. It's also so people know they exist, that these cultures exist, different cultures exist, different immigrant populations exist in our city. They contribute significantly, not just in terms of our economics, but in terms of the cultural pieces that they bring to the city of Boston. So just wanted to raise that up because it's critically important as well. Thank you again, Councillor Arroyo, and thank you again to the makers.
Thank you. Councillor Flaherty, followed by Councillor Edwards.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, and also thank the sponsors, the co-sponsors to this. I know it's from our perspective, this is an important endeavor. It's as Councilor Flynn outlined, it's arduous and complicated under sort of normal circumstances, let alone the added impacts that COVID have had on this issue. So every person in the city matters. Every family in the city matters, and we can make a difference when we work with folks to fill out the appropriate data on these forms so that we can make sure that their contribution to our city and to our country is respected and valued. So look forward to hearing the testimony. I want to thank the partners that are on this panel for the great work that they're doing. I know they've been at this morning, noon, and night, pre-COVID, obviously, of course, and then COVID hits and just makes things that much more difficult. So I've also joined Councilor Flynn, who's led on these efforts out there, participating in the census activities, and have also assisted in groups finding meeting spaces during the COVID experience as well, to make sure that they're getting the information out to the folks that need it, to make sure that they're filling out everything timely and getting it back. So I look forward to working with the sponsors and the chair to make sure that every vote is counted, every person is counted, every family is counted in this city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Mejia.
Yes, good morning. Thank you to the chair and to the makers for this hearing. I just wanted to just acknowledge that the reason why Congresswoman Presley is in her seat right now was because we added a seat. And so when we talk about representation, and when we talk about people showing up to be counted, that's how we're going to get these resources into our community, right? So we were able to do that 10 years ago. We need to continue to ensure that people are having access to the information that they need so they can fill out the census form. And one of the first things that Congresswoman Presley did when in January or so, she hosted a meeting and talked about the importance of the census. So we've been talking about this for a long time. I just wanted to just say that it's not just about getting people to stand up and be counted. It's like we also need to recognize, as the organizations who are doing their due diligence and all this hard work, is that there's a lot of myths, and it's not just around immigration status. There are a lot of folks who are afraid to fill out the census because some of the benefits that they receive, they believe that if they report that they are living with the father of their child, that's going to impact their, their benefits. People are also concerned about their housing. So when we talk about education and outreach, I just want to make sure that we're also helping people understand that that's not going to impact their benefits. And I think that is a conversation that we see in Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, and other low-income communities. So looking forward to being a part of this conversation. And thank you, and a big shout out to all those who have already been doing this amazing work to get our people counted. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Chairman Arroyo. First, I want to thank all the advocacy organizations, immigrant-based one and immigrant-led ones, for being here today. I think we all understand that it's a matter of resources and making sure everyone feels counted. Unfortunately, due to rhetoric, I think that's been coming from the White House for some time, there's a counter narrative about people's value and people, whether they should be counted or whether they should stand up and be seen. So I think it's all hands on deck right now to make sure everyone feels and knows that they're valued in the city of Boston. I'm looking forward to hearing directly from those advocates about what we as a city council and city councilors, especially at the district level, can do to amplify their work. And also I look forward to hearing from my colleagues about certain ideas that we have. We're thinking about phone banking in my office and just going ahead and calling at the low bar, just calling out to folks in identified areas in my district where there's low census turnout. So that's one thing. And I look forward to hearing from my colleagues about other ideas about how we're going to get people to fill out these forms. 100% agree about the misinformation and fear-based understanding of what the census does and doesn't do. So thank you so much for this opportunity to have this conversation. It's more than timely. I really appreciate your leadership, Chairman Arroyo.
Thank you. And I'm going to make my opening very brief just so we can get to this panel. Just to say that we all know how important the census is. And my focus here is hopefully that we can get some action steps moving forward for every counselor, including myself, in how we can start to really dig in our own neighborhoods. And if you're at large, where you can bring some reinforcements and other ways in which we can really push to get this count up. And so with that, I'm going to go to our first panel. Sebastian Zapata, who's the Senior Analyst and Census Liaison for the City of Boston, and Jeff Baylor, who's the Regional Director for the U.S. Census Bureau. And after that, we got a lot of panels, but I think what I'll do is after each panel, I'll open it up to questions, if any. Instead of going down the list, I'm going to ask my counselors to raise your hand, raise the blue hand if you have a question for that specific panel, and then I'll take you in the order of arrival. Or send me a text and say you have a question if you're unable to work the blue raise hand. And so with that, Sebastian Zapata and Jeff Baylor, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Can folks hear me?
Volume's a little low.
Is this better?
Yeah, it's better. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. So good morning, Chair Arroyo, makers of today's council hearing, and all of our esteemed councilors that are on the call. My name is Sebastian Zapata, and since January of 2019, I've been overseeing all the operations regarding census outreach and engagement on behalf of Mayor Walsh and the City Hall administration. So I think it's already been stated in terms of what's kind of up for grabs here about the census. But just to remind folks, this really is a once in a decade opportunity to shape the future of what our neighborhoods are going to look like. And you can kind of think of it in terms of three big buckets of what that stems from the census data that's collected. The first would be representation at the federal level. So again, as Councilor Meehy had mentioned, Ayanna Pressley is one of the absolute rock stars that we have down in Washington on behalf of the Commonwealth. But unfortunately, back in 2010, Massachusetts did lose a seat due to the fact that we did not have an accurate count as possible regarding Massachusetts. So obviously, when you have an undercount, you therefore potentially lose representation down in DC and the impact in the Electoral College. The second would be around legislative districts. So for the next 10 years, based off of the data that's collected right now through the 2020 census, it will reshape all districts at the congressional, state, and citywide level. And I think that one's really critical as well when you think about how do we circumnavigate historically gerrymandered districts? How do we include people that historically have not been seen? And so one of these ways is to be counted and therefore have districts that accurately reflect the people that live there. And the third is typically one of the ones that most people find very attractive as well, is the fact around federal funding. So based off of 2010, Massachusetts receives about $16 billion per year over the past 10 years. And that goes towards a lot of critical services and programming that we do both at the state and at the city levels. So if you care about public schools, if you care about our roads, transportation systems, if you care about affordable housing, one of the best ways to actually ensure that Massachusetts and therefore Boston will get its fair share of federal funding is to fill out the census. Essentially based off of 2010, for each person that goes counted, it equates to roughly $2,400 per person per year. So over the next decade, just by one person being counted in your household, it's about $24,000 in federal funding. And I think that one's even more so critical now in response to COVID-19, where a lot of the recovery and relief efforts that we're going to be doing and have been doing at City Hall is really going to be dependent on how much federal funding and assistance we can get. And so that is one of the best ways to ensure folks to make sure that we get our fair share is to fill out the census. In terms of the census itself, I do want to remind people that it will end September 30th. So we do have just a little under 6 weeks, about 40 days at this point, to try to increase the count as much as possible. Historically speaking, Boston is the 9th hardest city to count amongst the 100 largest US cities. And the reason for that is just due to our massive amount of diversity, which is what makes Boston such an incredible place to live, but nonetheless makes it very difficult to count. So in terms of populations that historically do go undercounted, you're talking about renters, you're talking about recent arrival, recent immigrants, or just immigrants in general, those that have limited English proficiency, children under the 5. And so again, when you think about in the context of what is the makeup of Boston, that is Boston in a nutshell of why it's so hard to count. About 2/3 of Bostonians are renters, about 29% of Bostonians are foreign born. Of that 29% of foreign born Bostonians, 37% speak a language other than English at home. We have a good amount of children under the 5. So you can see why in context, why it is difficult it is to get an accurate count. So in terms of what we've been doing at City Hall, again, specifically looking at it from an equity perspective of where are the most or highest likelihood of undercounted areas in Boston. And so what we ended up doing for the first time, to my knowledge, is we actually made an investment into the communities. So on behalf of Mayor Walsh's leadership, what we were able to do is put back 13 different community-based organization grants, some of which are on it, you're going to be hearing from a little bit. And they've just been doing incredible work. And even pre and post COVID, I would say it's extremely difficult even before COVID-19 hit to try to reassure people around just the importance of the census, how to the degree at which how easy it is. You can go online or over the phone. Both online or over the phone is available in 13 languages. But even then, I do recognize to a degree there is a digital divide amongst our residents in the city of Boston. So what we've been doing for the past month is putting forth events where people can actually get assistance with the Census Bureau. We've been partnering with them. Obviously, they have PPE, they have technology, and really it's just to get folks some assistance that might need that in-person help because for whatever reason, either online or over the phone might not be the best option for them. But again, so pre-COVID, a lot of what we were focused on was working with these community-based organizations, forming a complete count committee, which as Councilor Campbell had pointed out, she sits on that committee. She helps chair our subcommittee for elected officials, trying to take hold of different stakeholders and sectors across Boston to think about how do we sort of form a steering committee, if you will, to think about how do we best amplify messaging out to folks, because at the end of the day, there's not one singular message that's going to resonate with people. We have vastly diverse communities, whether that's people or place-based across Boston. So again, a lot of that has been focused with how do we partner with external stakeholders, whether that's community-based organizations that we funded or even the ones that we didn't fund that still applied, as well as our complete count committee, working with different facilities and institutions across municipal boundaries, such as Boston Public Schools, Boston Center Youth and Families, Boston Housing Authority, Boston Public Libraries, pretty much anything that falls under the B umbrella we've been working with to think about, again, how do we contact folks that you essentially already provide services to and try to assist them with knowing how important the census is and how quick and easy it can be. In terms of what we've been doing post-COVID-19, we focused on how do we purchase ethnic media buys. So we've done ads in the Bay State Banner, Sampan, El Mundo, El Planeta, La Mega Radio, really trying to meet people where they're at to a degree of where are they getting their information from. We've done massive amount of info banking at this point. We've done about nearly 19,000 dials specifically into low response areas of Roxbury and Dorchester. We've been looking into purchasing paid media in terms of targeted social media ad buys as well. Specifically, again, in East Boston, Roxbury, Dorchester, traditionally where we find the most amount of hardest to count folks or historically undercounted people, as well as the fact that we're also potentially at this point looking into how do we purchase text messaging to also try to do outreach that way. We've already done multiple amount of texts throughout our Boston Public School families. We've done robocalls from our Age Strong Commission to over the population of over 70,000 aging strong residents across the city. We've also, again, done texting to those folks that have opted into the COVID response alert system. So there's probably a pretty good chance that some of the folks already on this panel have gotten some kind of notification from City Hall. But really, at the end of the day, Boston's response rate as it stands right now, our self-response rate is 54.8%. Back in 2010, our final self-response rate was 64.4. So there's a way to go. I'm not sure what our total response rate is when you include non-response follow-up. So that is that door knocking operation that the Census Bureau has at this point. But if folks, just to remind people, there are door knockers at this point. They've been going out since the beginning of August. So if you, for whatever reason, you do not want a door knock from the Census Bureau, the best way to go about avoiding that is simply respond either online or over the phone to the 2020 census. And so again, I know I'm well over my 2 minutes, so I apologize for that. But I'm happy to take any questions or comments. And I think in particular, try to discuss how can we best overcome the barriers that we faced in these last 6 weeks that we have.
Thank you. And to be clear, the panelists have 5 minutes, so you're fine. That's for the community public comment section. Jeff Baylor. Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity to share the latest updates on the 2020 census and our operations. But before I begin with that, I do want to say thank you to all of you. While some like to compare our self-response rates to how we did in 2010 to gauge how successful we are in 2020, it's not a fair comparison. I believe we've exceeded expectations given the challenges we faced that no one could have predicted before this census began. Secretary Galvin and his amazing team, Eva Malona and Mira, who are leading the efforts of the Commonwealth Complete Count Committee under the amazing leadership of Etsy Simoshe, our city leaders for Mayor Walsh and his team, led by Sebastian Zapata, who has been amazing to work with, and I can't thank you, Sebastian, enough, opening so many doors, so many opportunities throughout the city to partner with the census. Our local elected officials, the amazing philanthropic leaders who have been given so many resources to partners throughout the city, our community-based leaders from faith-based leaders to business owners, community activists to neighborhood leaders, being that trusted voice to educate their respective community on how safe the census is, how easy it is to complete, and how important it is for their community. Seeing the rates where they currently exist, given the fact that one of the most important pieces of a census was taken away, the ability to bring people together to educate and motivate them and to provide them the resources they need to fill out their census, yet the self-response rate is still amazing. This is a testament to all the people I mentioned, to all the trusted voices throughout the state and the city of Boston who have created the foundation of education and trust over the past 2 years. It's because of you that we have started off so strong. And at a time when all would have understood if you were to hit the pause button, you kept going. You re-engineered your efforts and continue to lead with passion. For that, as a representative of the New York region responsible for data collection activities in Massachusetts, I will always be grateful. Thank you for your tireless efforts. And we know there's still work to do. As of yesterday afternoon, the self-response rate for Massachusetts, again, the number of households that have either gone online, called it in over the phone, or filled it out on paper, is at 66.4%, only 2.4% behind the final self-response rate in 2010. Again, not a measure of how many people were counted, rather the percentage of households that have responded to date. In Suffolk County, currently at 54.9%, and as Sebastian mentioned, in Boston at 54.8%. And this data, these rates, these self-response rates are available to the public, updated week at 3 p.m. at 2020census.gov. And we know the leaders of these communities and partners throughout their neighborhoods have been amazing, not due to the lack of effort that the rates are at the current levels, rather an indication of the challenges that exist, from language barriers, high percentage of renters, lack of internet connectivity or access to a computing device, fear of government, or complex living arrangements. These neighborhoods have been some of the most active in terms of events and commitments and investment in the 2020 census, and we must continue to support them to the fullest extent. There have been changes to our operational schedule as a result of COVID-19. I want to mention the 3 main operations. First off, self-response, originally scheduled to conclude at the end of July, will now conclude September 30th of this year. Every household in Boston will have the ability to go online, call one of our toll-free telephone numbers, or if they have their paper questionnaire, they can complete it and mail it back in. Non-response follow-up, the operation in which we knock on the doors of every household that we have yet to receive a census response, originally scheduled to begin May 13th and end at the end of July. The start date in Boston was moved to August 6th, and this operation will continue until the end of September unless we complete it earlier. And finally, service-based enumeration has been rescheduled from the end of March to September 22nd through the 24th. Under this operation, we visit every mobile food van, soup kitchen, and homeless shelter to enumerate the persons that they serve, as well as conduct our homeless count in the early morning hours of one of these days, visiting non-sheltered outdoor locations for those persons who are not sleeping in a shelter. So what's next? We continue to knock on doors. We have over 1,000 census takers in Suffolk County who are currently knocking on doors. As of this morning, we were 31.4% complete of our total non-response workload, and we just started on August 6th. We need to continue to message to every household to complete their 2020 census, whether online or over the phone, on paper, or in person when a census taker knocks on their door. Or incorporate a mobile questionnaire assistance into your upcoming community event, an activity where we bring resources to you, tablets and materials, and help people fill out their census right then and there. We have staff ready to support your events, helping your community members to complete their 2020 census. The finish line is in sight, and we are honored to be working with all of you to ensure the most complete and accurate count for the city of Boston. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to open it up to questions from the council now. If you have a question, if you want to if you're on camera and you raise your hand, I'll go to you. If you have a blue hand up, I'll go to you. Well, I'll start since seeing no hands. There we go. Let me go ahead and go. I'll save my questions for last. I'll go to you, Kenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask Sebastian, I guess this goes first to you, but also to the to Jeff and the census. So when we started having this conversation, you know, I think we were all focused on a whole bunch of hard to count areas based on our experience in the past. And one thing I've seen in my district is that there are a number of places that I don't think we had any contingency plans for being massively undercounted that are. So an example in my district would be that the West End is at a 32.4% response rate right now, whereas for in 2010 it was at 70%. That's a 37.9% gap. I think it's one of the most dramatic ones in the city. And also, I think when you look at the hard to count map for Boston, you see that the orange and yellow areas heavily overlap with our university community. So I guess the two questions I have are this. One is, what are we doing to shift our plans to deal with the places that have turned out to be hard to count because of the pandemic that were not part of our original hard to count action plan? And the second is, my impression is that the university, the group quarters counts, and maybe also the off-campus student counts that some of them did. I think Northeastern, Wentworth, BU, and my district all did some off-campus counts. My impression is that they're maybe not included in the hard to count map. And certainly it would be helpful for my office in terms of focusing phone banks and everything to know what those real numbers are. So I'm wondering if there's any access to data that harmonizes, combines the group quarters sort of university-based counts and the hard to count map so we can figure that out. So those are my two questions. What's the deal with those numbers from the universities, and what are we doing to deal with the areas we didn't expect to be hard to count that have these really big gaps?
So thank you, Councilor, for those questions. So in terms of the colleges and universities throughout Boston, you can kind of think of the count for those kind of in two spheres. The first would be those students that live on campus. They're counted through what's called group quarters. So, you know, any dorms or university housing or college housing. And simply what they have to do is just provide a roster of who lives in their provided campus housing. So to my knowledge, that operation is about to end at this point, and Jeff might have a little bit more specifics on the dates here. But in terms of off-campus, one of the few silver linings that COVID-19 has awarded the city is to actually now universities and colleges can submit data for those students that live off-campus. So as a reminder, the city of Boston does already have an ordinance on the books where college and universities have to report where off-campus students live. So fortunately, what we were able to do is leverage that ordinance and work with our subcommittee on higher education. So working through ACOM, working through all the different college and universities. You know, we have well over 20 throughout the city of Boston, well over 151,000 college students. You know, roughly over 33,000 live in Boston proper. So you can imagine how difficult that might be to count these students. But again, fortunately, what can happen, and that operation did just end last Friday on the 14th, is that college universities were able to provide that data for those rosters, if you will, of students of on campus. I have asked when and how that data will kind of land in Boston's numbers. Does that count towards group quarters? Does that count towards self-response? Does that count towards non-response follow-up? I haven't gotten any clarity just yet from the Bureau on that perspective. And you know, one of the things about the census to remind folks is that it's completely confidential. So all the data that is submitted to the Bureau stays with the Bureau until 72 years have passed. So I will never be able to know unless someone is willing to divulge that information, whether or not they have submitted. But what I can tell you is that based off of the top 3 largest universities that have the highest amount of off-campus students, you're looking at Northeastern, Boston University, Mass Boston. They did reply in an email to me letting me know that, yay, you know, we submitted this data, you know, thanks for presenting this opportunity. So that's kind of how we tackle the students that live both on and off campus. And to sort of get to your question about how do we tackle now these areas that we did not anticipate being as low as they are. What we've been doing is trying to work with property managers and property owners across the city. So again, in areas that tend to be more affluent, that really just didn't exist to the degree which they do today. So you're thinking, as well as parts of the Back Bay, you're thinking of the Seaport, you're thinking of the East Boston waterfront, you're thinking along South Huntington Ave and Jamaica Plain, you're thinking along Forest Hill. So anywhere you see just a massive influx of development that tends to be a little bit more skewed towards Class A luxury housing, those areas are extremely low right now. And that's kind of why we've been targeting through the network at Boston Public Development Agency, BPDA. How do we partner with the developers? How do we partner with the owners to think about How do we message out to the residents that live there? It might be that they have left Boston when COVID-19 hit and they might not have returned, or they have come back and they haven't filled out the census yet for that Boston address. So in the next 6 weeks, again, what we're going to be doing is how do we create pop-up events, if you will, in the lobby or right outside the lobby that folks can sort of drop in, get questions answered, fill out the census then, or at the bare minimum, start to do messaging towards tenants that live in these large apartment complexes.
Great. Thank you so much, Sebastian. I think my office would love to be involved in that. I think we have a lot of areas like that, and I'm very concerned about how we accelerate. We've certainly been pushing things out to property managers and neighborhood associations too. But and then I guess just for Jeff, if you could give us some clarity on where the group quarters and then also this non-traditional, off-campus student count, when that's going to come into the numbers. Because again, for my office and others, we have a limited period of time, limited resources. I don't want to dedicate them to trying to drive up the numbers in a track that looks low, but is actually high, because we've actually got those numbers sitting in the back office with you guys.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's a great point. And Sebastian raised this question to me earlier in the week, and we're working on trying to find a way to be able to share data below the state level. I know recently the Census Bureau just put out a report. They updated at 3 p.m. every day that shows you the number of households that were counted via self-response, and then the number of households that were counted via non-response follow-up. So there's a couple of pieces here. When we talked about those off-campus students, we've never done this before. We've never collected administrative data for students who live off-campus. So I think they're still analyzing the data, making sure it can be used. There's information that some schools were able to provide, partial data versus the full data. So there's basically 3 ways in which we could count an off-campus college student. First, they could still self-respond. Every college student, could still self-respond. We're working with colleges and universities to continue to get that message out there. That would be the ideal situation. The second situation we can get them counted is non-response follow-up. We're out there knocking on doors of those apartments. Now, granted, they're not there, and more than likely, it's not that if someone is there, they didn't live there on April 1st of last year. They may have lived at another apartment or lived on campus. But we can get at least partial data. If, from the apartment manager, the landlord, can we find out how many students lived in that particular apartment? Can we get breakdown on race and ethnicity, if possible, approximate ages, sex, those types of things. And then the third way is this off campus. So I think what the Bureau, what the plans are is to see, can we get self-response first? If we can't, can we get some type of response during non-response follow-up, and then fill in the gaps with this administrative data we receive. One of the frustrations that we have, of course, is non-response follow-up. When I talked about 31% of non-response follow-up has been completed in Suffolk County as of this morning. Our workload isn't just those households that have yet to respond. Our workload deals with duplicates, with people who have self-responded without their ID, and maybe they put in an address that doesn't exactly match to the address we have on our master address file. So we are very careful about flagging any records for deletion. What we have to do is we have to go out there in person and visit that household to determine, is it indeed the same household, or is it a separate household that we have yet to respond from? So because of those challenges, we in the regions, we don't have the data to be able to provide to you. What we're looking at doing is at smaller levels of geography, can we provide you with NRFU completion rates? So you can at least see those communities in which we have a lot of non-response follow-up left to do. And in some communities that may make sense. For instance, if there's a lot of second homes in a community or vacation homes, then it doesn't make sense to put a lot of resources into that. We will verify those are second homes or vacation homes and that they're vacant, get them counted and move forward. So that's what we're trying to do right now. And hopefully we'll be able to provide something shortly that'll, maybe a few times between now and the end of non-response follow-up that will help you kind of gauge where you can get the most bang for your buck.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. And just a reminder, if you have questions, councilors, please do raise your blue hands. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. Just wanted to follow up briefly on Councilor Bach's comments question. So to Jeff and to Sebastian, Do you have any recommendations for some of my colleagues and for myself on ways that counselors can be effective in reaching more residents in hard to reach areas? If you have some examples, I worked with Mark from CPA. We did phone banking into a lot of hard to reach areas. We did other events. I think I've done about 14 or 15 events, but do you have any other examples on specific projects or recommendations on what counselors can do, whether it's working with a civic group at a town hall or a Zoom meeting, on how we can reach hard to get residents?
Yeah, so let me mention a couple of things that just recently were done throughout our region that I think provided some great gain. We had a council member in New York City. We also had an elected official from New Jersey. We all know food brings people together. So they got an ice cream truck, another one got a pizza truck. They went into the neighborhood where they had the lowest self-response, and they offered pizza for individuals who would come out and fill out the census right then and there. So what they did is they partnered with us. We had, anywhere we can, we have hundreds and hundreds of census response representatives. These are team members who've been sworn in. They have to follow Title 13 and the oath of confidentiality. They all have iPads. We speak over 100 languages throughout our region. And what we do is we bring those individuals to support that event. So we have staff there who are actually enumerating households right then and there, in the language or whatever may be needed. Another popular thing that's currently being done, again, with our mobile questionnaire assistance, are food distribution sites. We get invited, our census staff get invited to food distribution sites. We'll set up a table off to the side, but we also have a partnership specialist who walk the line to talk about the census and how important it is, what it means to the community, and then direct them to come over to an area where they can go ahead and fill out the census right then and there.
Thank you. And just finally, if you're interested, Jeff or Sebastian, tomorrow we have a Chinatown cleanup right at the Chinatown gate at 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. But if you're interested in joining us, would love to have you. If you wanted to set up a booth, please let me know. We'll make sure it happens. And I think it would be a great way to reach some people. I know Mark would support that as well, CPA. And so hopefully we can see some people tomorrow in Chinatown. We're doing a cleanup, and I might even bring some bagels and juice for everybody too.
We would love to partner with you with that.
Thank you.
I would certainly echo what Jeff said in terms of trying to think about where can you host these mobile questionnaire assistance centers or MQAs, shorthand. Most oftentimes it's going to connect if you just say pop-up event for people, because MQA is very technical for some people. But I mean, we with the Census Bureau since the beginning of August, in particular in Chinatown, they've been at the Chinatown Y on Friday mornings. What we've been doing is thinking through how do we get access to some of our top meal sites and try to set up pop-up events, MQAs there, knowing that it's one of the few spaces that people are still, in a sense, physically a captured audience. I mean, the nice thing about MQA or pop-up events is that they can also be held online. So if you wanted to do a Zoom, for example, you could also do an MQA that way. I mean, I think it's just incredibly difficult right now, given the realities that we're in. But I would say something else that's very beneficial to try to just let people know is, again, just the confidentiality aspect behind it. I think there's a lot of people that are very concerned with this particular administration right now at the federal level, what's going to happen if I respond. And so just trying to demystify what is on the census. Again, it's 10 basic questions, and it should take no longer than 10 minutes, and it's going to decide the future of our communities for the next 10 years. They're just trying to capture some basic demographic info around self-identifying race, ethnicity, sex, how many folks live in your household. If you feel uncomfortable, you can skip a question should you not want to answer it. And again, that those responses at an individual level will not be shared until 72 years have passed. So no elected official, no government agency outside the Census Bureau, your landlord, no one will see your individual responses until 72 years have passed. So I think that's also a critical piece to inform people about as well.
Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you all. Councilor Flaherty, followed by Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And through the chair, Flynn still still has his communion money, so make sure he springs for coffee and munchkins as well. To Sebastian, obviously a nice presentation. I appreciate going into detail as to what the census means in terms of the federal funding that comes to our city. A lot of folks take it for granted, and that's obviously always been a concern of mine. It seems like sort of every 10 years we go through this exercise, and again, it's an arduous task. So I appreciate your outreach and the department's outreach to try to get folks to participate as best we can. And to Jeff's point too, that was very encouraging to hear that you felt that sort of we would have been on track to sort of surpass our numbers from the last census, which obviously was sidetracked or derailed, if you will, because of COVID. Couple of quick questions. What else can we do? What are we not doing? And how can we, or me personally, or the council help you guys coming down the home stretch? That's number one. And two, have you guys engaged our letter carriers? And I only say that because I've talked to letter carriers recently, and a number of them are telling me that the postcards are still like in hallways and on the floor of foyers and lobbies of homes and buildings that they're delivering the mail to. And they even seemed a little discouraged, as well as the fact that they're also reporting sort of that the younger folks that may be newer to communities and neighborhoods and or maybe in between residences don't seem to be taking this seriously. And it seems to be sort of the theme, particularly with our younger generation around COVID and social distancing and not adhering and sort of listening to some of the protocols. But the census is very important, and their support and their filling this out matters. As you referenced, that it's sort of a $24,000 per head federal allotment. So I guess what else can we do, as Sebastian alluded to, what else can we also to get that segment of our city to sort of take this seriously? Boston is now their host city and neighborhood, and how can we get them to spend a little time and fill these things out and work maybe with our letter carriers in some capacity? So that's it in a nutshell. Just what else is left on the table that we're not doing that we can do? How can I or we as a council support you guys coming down the home stretch? And what are we doing if we're networking maybe with the letter carriers and or this younger population to let them know how important, how serious this is, and we need their help?
So on behalf of City Hall, we have not engaged with letter carriers. I think that's something we can look into. But in general, how can you as a city councilor, as an elected official, help? Well, councilor, if you want to be our census cowboy, a la Chicago, we can definitely get you some spurs and a neon green hat. But all jokes aside, I think the reality is that you are an elected official. You have a platform which you can use. So to the extent of which you can use it, whether that's going through your newsletter or doing out social media, I think a lot of engagement at this point really is focused on social. So as much as you can pump out notifications, that'd be extremely appreciated. As well as thinking through how can you host these MQA, these pop-up events in spaces throughout your district. I think that'd also be critical, because at the end of the day, neither myself nor Jeff and the Census Bureau team, they're not going to know the community as best as you do, right? That's the reason you were elected to lead, is to take charge and let people know what are the resources available to them. So both myself, Jeff, and his team, we're all here to be a resource, as well as the community-based organizations throughout the city of Boston. So I would highly suggest just reaching out to us as well and think through, like, here are some absolute bona fide locations, whether it's a farmer's market, whether it's a mail site, really anything that you think would be a good location to set up an MQA in person, or again, try to host one online as well. So if you wanted to drum up attention, we're going to have an online Zoom meeting where we talk census and we get people assistance there and then. That's another great opportunity as well.
Yeah, and I completely agree with Sebastian. Your voice is probably the most powerful tool you can use. I mean, every opportunity you get, talk about the census. If you're blasting out emails, include something about the census. In every meeting you have, start off with, hey, have you filled out your census? Let them know how easy it was. Talk about how safe the data is and what's at stake for the next 10 years. You're going to hear some really cool things from Vatsity and Beth and the other amazing partners, some great things that they're doing as well. And it's so important now. It's not too late to be using your voice, because one of the things we see in every census, as soon as we start knocking on doors, people decide it's time to self-respond, right? They don't want us coming back. One of the things every census taker does, after we knock on a door, if no one's there, we leave a notice of visit. And on that notice of visit, we write their unique census ID. They have the website where to go online. We give them the English and Spanish toll-free telephone numbers, and we tell them, sorry, we missed you. We'll be back in a couple days. And to a lot of people, that energizes them. We've seen that. I mean, if you look at the self-response rates over the last week in Massachusetts and communities, they've been jumping up much, much quicker than they have in, you know, the past month. And that's because when we're leaving these notice of visits, you know, people don't want people knocking on their doors. They don't want to open up their doors and have this conversation. So now is an excellent time to use your voice to just continue to bombard your community on why the census is so important.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you all. Councilor Braden, and then I'll ask some questions, and then we'll go to the next panel. Thank you.
I had a question. This is sort of getting very granular down into the neighborhood level. We have a large senior housing building in Brighton that is largely Russian and Chinese population. They basically aren't allowing anyone in. So I don't know, are we working with groups like True Life and Covenant House to B'nai B'rith to help with that? If we can't get in, if census workers can't get in, it's going to be very difficult. Sebastian, that's a question for you, I think.
Yeah, I'll let Jeff kind of speak to you, because that might fall under group quarters. I'm not entirely sure, but in terms of what we've been doing, so we've been working with the Allston Brighton Complete Count Committee, and just across the city, multiple complete count committees. And obviously we formed one at City Hall, but they're individual across neighborhoods. They have their own. So in particular, the Allston Brighton CCC has been great to partner with. The Allston Brighton Health Collaborative runs that. And so pretty much they, again, as I said before, Jeff, the Census Bureau team, they're not getting into the community as best as the local on the ground community groups will, or the actual residents of these neighborhoods will.
Yeah.
So that's why I always take their lead. I'm happy to provide any technical resources, in particular, just sort of giving people how to demystify the census. But in general, we always just follow the lead of whatever it is that the local community groups think is going to resonate the most in terms of messaging, as well as what are the best ways to tackle some of these historic intercounty communities.
Yeah. So I'm in communication with the Complete Count Committee at the Allston Brighton Health Collaborative. So two universities, BU and Harvard, seem to have done a pretty good job. How do we have data on how far we're behind with the specific colleges in the neighborhood? Because it's about 17,000 students live in the neighborhood, so it's not insignificant.
Yeah, Jeff, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit more to this, but again, we've never been able to access data in general with when schools actually provided to the Bureau, again, because it is confidential, we'll never know, unless you work at the Census Bureau when you select people that have the access to those data files. Okay. But again, this time around is the first time the Bureau's ever accepted administrative records for off-campus count. So I think once we get a little bit more clarity from the Bureau themselves about how and when that is going to sort of tick into our response rate, I'll absolutely send that out to folks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I must say it's because of the work of leaders throughout Massachusetts that we're able to even have the option of using off-campus administrative records. They fought for this from, shortly in March after a lot of the schools started to close, and without a doubt, their voices really made this come to fruition. We'll have to check. I'll have staff reach out to your office to check on the specific question regarding the senior housing. It depends if it's a group quarter. If it's a group quarter, we work directly with the administrator there. And in most cases, they just send us an administrative file for all the residents that live in that building. If it's just an apartment complex that houses older adults, then they're free to come and go. And it's not really a nursing home type facility. Then we would reach out. Typically what we do and how everyone on this call can also help is when we have access issues, we'd like to reach out to our partners to see, is there a way we can get those people who live in that building counted? Maybe it's not having census takers knock on each apartment that hasn't filled it out. Maybe it's setting up a mobile questionnaire assistance in the
language
with those who speak Russian and some of the other languages you mentioned. We have staff there that can help them assist them in filling it out right then and there.
This particular facility has done an incredible job keeping the COVID infection out. They basically have everyone is like it's locked down, and they've managed to keep the infection out very well. I will contact it really is like more of a level like an independent living facility. It's like senior housing. It's not a nursing home. So would an administrative file for all the residents work in this case? If we don't...
In this case, no, more than likely it's probably in the non-response follow-up universe. So each address or each department would be its own housing unit. So certainly we can get the word out that people can still self-respond. They can go online or they can call the toll-free telephone number. We also have the ability, if they would prefer, we can have one of our census takers call them. We can work, to try to get times and set up appointments and actually have the census takers call them over the phone if that's something that they would prefer.
In Chinese and Russian?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. We'll figure it out then. Thank you so much.
Yep, well, I'll definitely have staff reach out to gather more info.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna go ahead and ask my questions now. I see Julia Mejia is behind me, and then I see Kenzie Bach has her hand raised. I just do want to remind folks that we got 9 other panelists to hear from, so I'm going to try and make this brief. In terms of the door knocking operation that's going on right now, it started in August. So just what are our resources there? How many folks do we actually have in our door knocking operation in the city of Boston right now?
So I don't have the ability to get down to the city of Boston. It'll take me some data mining to do that, because we do things at collection geography. In Suffolk, we have over 1,000 people that are hired today. And then of course, our employees, they choose what days and what hours they can work. Today, we had over 600 staff who put in hours that received an assignment that'll be out there today knocking on doors. And we're going to continue to hire through the end of next week. So if there are people who are interested in supporting the census, their community, by working as a census taker, they can go to 2020census.gov/jobs, apply online for a position.
And do we know, is it fair to say that the vast majority of folks who have already self-responded have done that through the internet, or is that on paper? Like, do we know what our most successful so far has been in terms of getting folks engaged?
Yeah, overwhelmingly, it has been via the internet. A very, very large percentage have done it online. The next is paper, and the least popular of the 3 self-response modes is over the phone.
Thank you. And then my final question is to Sebastian, who I think would probably know this better. I know the city of Boston's used the COVID text message line for things like register to vote or what the vote day is. I've seen it use it. I think on Saturday, it said, for the census. Do we know what the operational plans are in terms of using those kinds of resources for the census moving forward?
Yeah, so I mean, again, we only have 6 weeks, about 41 days at this point till the 30th. So we're just going to be exploring every and all options that we can do. I think in particular, having the COVID text alert system be one of them. But also, how do we individually look at partnering with organizations like Mass Voter Table, for example, to try to do a large text banking operation specific to just Boston residents. And so I don't have all the details just yet on that specific operation, but hopefully by the end of next week, that'll be up and running.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to go to Councilor Mejia now for her questions, and then we'll go to the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just have a few questions. I'm just curious about, I always bring into the space that there are a lot of folks who may not know how to read or write in their home, in their native language, or any other language for that matter. And so I'm just curious about what efforts are being made in that front. I mean, I'll just speak for myself. My mom didn't even finish 3rd grade. And so whenever the census is up, I'm the one who, she knows how to read, but struggles with it and also writing. And so I'm just curious, and that is the case for a lot of our immigrants. So I'm just curious about what supports are being provided for those folks who are struggling to read or write in their native language.
So a couple of things regarding knocking on doors. The way we hire staff, first we hire those who speak a language other than English. That was our priority. Make sure we have enough staff who speak as many languages as possible. And then we backfilled where we had additional vacancies with English only speakers. when they're knocking on doors, they do show a language card if there is a language barrier, and then we have the ability to reassign that case to someone who speaks that language. The other important thing I can remember is there are proxies who do help people fill out. So a family member can help another family member fill out the census by going online or calling it in over the phone. That's absolutely okay to do. Again, there's a relationship there that it's a trusted person. What we ask not to do is just have partners just knocking on doors randomly, trying to collect the data on behalf of the census, because that's when scams do start.
Jeff, can you tell me what the language cards are? Do you actually show them something when you say language card? What is that?
Yeah, so it's like a list of languages, and then the respondent can point to the language in which they speak. And then what we do is we take that information and reassign the case to someone who has that language capability.
So then, and probably these language cards have already been produced, but I would just consider maybe utilizing their flag instead of actually writing the name. Like if you say Spanish, because if you don't know how to read or write in your native language, you could show them something and it might just look like numbers to them, right? So it's just something to consider in the future. I mean, I know it's too late now, but I think flags or things that people can identify with might be a more culturally competent way to address that particular barrier for language access, something to consider.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
And then for Sebastian, you talked about debunking the myths for census. It seems like every time we have this conversation, the public just has more distrust of the government. With things like the post office even being made political at this point, how can we work on the local level to address some of these concerns in our community? What are we doing around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it, Counselor, in terms of just the multiple attempts to try to skew results, whether it was to try to get a citizenship question on there back in 2019, that's, fortunately not on there, that I would say has had a chilling effect. I don't have the hard numbers on that, but I think anecdotally, going specifically in East Boston, I was with Manlio, for example, from NOAA. I know he's up next with the next panel, but it's been really difficult to get, in particular, immigrants to want to respond to this because they are so fearful of what might happen. Just again, based off of the current administration, last month they announced a memo to try to exclude non-citizens from the apportionment count. That's obviously highly contested at this point. I don't really see a legal standing for it, but I'm not a legal scholar myself. But obviously ACLU has filed suit, Common Cause has filed suit. The state of New York is leading a charge as well that Massachusetts is included on. Local groups like Brazilian Women's Group, Lawyers for Civil Rights, they're filed suit as well in Boston in particular. But in terms of how we can sort of demystify it, right? Again, like I say that to a degree that the onus is on all of us to just, as folks that might have a little bit more time to be sophisticated on the issue or just have this sophistication in the first place, right? So you pointed to your mom, and I'll point to my parents. Like, they're also I have immigrant parents. So as a kid, I was oftentimes a translator for any official document that came through the home. And I think that's often the case for a lot of Boston Public School students today as well. And so how do we work with Boston Public Schools? How do we work through trusted messengers? How do we work with community-based organizations to sort of have them be the trusted messengers as well as amplified? Just again, there's no question about citizenship. It's very basic questions that don't really, I would argue, don't intrude in people's privacy. I often joke that if you have a YouTube or a Facebook account, you have much more privacy already at disposal than you would through the Census Bureau form itself. Mm-hmm. And so really, I think that's what it comes down to, just letting people know, it's less than 10 minutes for most households to do this. Here are specifically the questions you're going to be asked. If you're not comfortable with one of them, you can skip it. And, if you care about having representation in DC, that starts with the census. If you care about having accurate districts that reflect the people that live here, that's the census. If you care about having federal funding for our schools, roads, affordable housing, healthcare, and food access, that's the census. It's really about the data that we collect. It's about the people behind it. And so I think even more so moving forward, it's, how do we self-identify these communities? So again, they're represented in the eyes of the federal government. Because unfortunately, if you don't participate in the census, you're essentially not counted by the federal government. But we know very much so in Boston that you do exist and we welcome you here. So we want to make sure that you get counted so we have the appropriate resources to help you out moving forward.
So I'm just going to say one last thing, because I definitely want to be mindful of time. One thing that I just like to offer is that what we've been doing is working with folks who are undocumented to help kind of be engaged in the conversation. So they become the peer leaders, the peer mentors around this, so that they own the message, they understand it, and then they are organizing in their communities. So I think that if we're tapping into people who are living the realities and creating space for them to kind of help drive the message, that's something that has been really helpful for us in terms of our advocacy efforts on this behalf. So I think tapping into the communities that have most to gain to be the ones who are promoting the messages is really important. So I know Chairman Ricardo Arroyo, I'm done. You happy now, okay?
No, you got 2 more shots at this. It'll be fine. So thank you so much both for your time. You're welcome to stay, but we're gonna head off to the second panel now. So thank you again both for your efforts. On our second panel is Mark Liu, who's the Operations Development Director at Chinese Progressive Association. Vatsadi Sivonsai, I believe is how that's pronounced, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Director of Organizing and Census Manager for the MIRA Coalition. Taniqua Hines, who's the Racial Justice Community Advocate at the ACLU, and Beth Huang, who's the Director at Mass Voter Table. And so I'm going to give all of you, we're supposed to be done at 11. I don't know how close to that we're going to get, but I'd like to be closer to 11 than to 12. And so I'm going to give all of you 3 to 5 minutes for opening. Mark Liu, we'll start with you.
Hey, good morning, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Dear esteemed counselors, thank you for having me. My name is Mark Liu. I'm the Operations and Development Director at the Chinese Progressive Association. We're a 43-year-old grassroots community organization representing over 1,200 predominantly working class, limited English speaking Chinese American immigrants in the greater Boston area. We've been involved in the City of Boston 2020 census efforts for more than a year. Definitely remember last summer, we would have a block party and starting to do our census pledge cards. Also last fall, part of our voter education and door knocking campaign, we knocked over 1,500 doors. Also introducing people about the importance of the census. We also work very closely with Councilor Flynn and the Mayor's Office, U.S. Census Bureau. We did a half year to census kickoff in Chinatown, census poster contest with a youth program, posting posters for the census and a bunch of Chinatown businesses and buildings, and sending out education materials to thousands of community members. Before the pandemic, we were also doing a lot of Lunar New Year banquet presentations and distributing materials through that as well. Obviously, like all of us, the pandemic changed our whole program. We moved completely to phone banking. So, I mean, I think a lot of people have talked about it, but I think this integration of outreach around the pandemic and people's day-to-day lives and issues that they're facing, and with the census, makes a lot of sense. So when we were checking in on our elderly, see how they were doing in the pandemic, we were also talking to them about the census. We trained up, 20 volunteers to help us do census calls. In early July, we held a 3-day census telethon where people were calling everyone in their phone book. We were calling our members lists. We were working with, Beth on with the voter table with pulling from lists of names through our voter database stuff as well. And we were joined by the mayor and Councilor Flynn for that. And we made over close to 2,000 calls and helped 200 people, almost 200 people fill out the census through that. I want to particularly emphasize this piece about, calling people that we know that are in our social networks and, people we have a relationship with, particularly now we know that a lot of our folks are getting more and more scam calls on their phone. And so people are even more suspicious answering the phone. And so hearing from people that they trust or organizations that they trust is even more important. So even as you all as counselors, I think you guys have also a network of constituents that you've helped over all these years and that know you. And so I think that level of trust and hearing from you, particularly around this time when there's a lot of distrust, is really important. We also, very grateful for the city for their support and want to see continued expanded multilingual outreach. Many, as people mentioned, people still face considerable language technological barriers, to Councilor Mejia's point. So there's the language people speak, there's the language if people don't, education level for people in their own language, but there's also obviously people who can't necessarily spell their name or spell their address in English over the phone, which makes it very hard to help them, at least through phone banking. And so similar to, I think, maybe what Sebastian mentioned about kind of maybe the outreach in luxury buildings, something that we haven't been able to have capacity to get to that I think could be helpful is working with management in a lot of elderly buildings that I think particularly have language and technological barriers. And if there's ways of kind of helping them in person in a safe, socially distant way, would reach a lot of those folks that are facing a lot of those technological and language barriers that can't, share basic information in English that's needed over the phone. And I think that's basically it for me. I think everyone covered why this is so critically important for our neighborhood, especially now. People are so reliant on the services and the benefits that come through the city, and it impacts all parts of our lives. And I hope the city, I think, has done a great job integrating it. I'm glad to hear the food distribution centers, like as was mentioned before, the Wang Y, there's a line around the corner every day for people to pick up food. So if we're hitting people where they're already are already gathering and already kind of trying to meet people's day-to-day needs and integrating in the census into that, I think that's going to have a huge impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Vatsadi Sivansai, the Director of Organizing and Census Manager at the MENA Coalition. If you're on, you can go at this point.
Thank you, Chairman. Hi, my name is Vatsadi Sivangsai. I'm the Director of Organizing at the MENA Coalition, and I'm also the Census Manager. So I'm very happy to be here to share a little bit more about some of the strategies that we have worked on as the chair of the statewide Complete Count Committee, responsible for supporting partners throughout the state in thinking about the strategic outreach and the implementation of strategies within our neighborhoods. So Ava, our CEO and president of MERA, who many of you are familiar with, is the chair of the statewide committee. So I just want to first thank the team. Thanks Sebastian and Mayor Walsh for your commitment and your investment into the outreach here in Boston. Together, along with local CCCs such as the Boston CC and regional CCs, Mass Counts Coalition, and also local grassroots organization and service organizations such as Rosie's Place, statewide agencies such as DESE, the Department of Education and Secondary, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And in the Census Bureau, we have worked with over 700 partners across the state and growing even today. MERA has been working with Mass Counts partners and also funders from the Massachusetts Census Equity Fund since 2018, and trying to build this collective outreach and the establishment of the statewide Complete Count Committee. Our main goal is to work with trusted voices who know their communities very well and have built these relationships for many, many years, because they are the one and you are the one that can really give that message out to the community members, despite the many challenges that we're facing currently and the many challenges historically that our immigrant and communities that struggle to live every single day and to be able to maximize their potential. So I want to share first a little bit about the strategies that we've implemented, and you may have seen them digitally or here on the ground in person. But prior to COVID-19 and the pandemic, which was mid-March, we were providing Train the Trainers seminars across the state. We had over, I believe the Train the Trainers, we had over 200 participants. And then we also did the Questionnaire Assistance Center training, which is very similar to the mobile questionnaire assistance centers or the pop-ups that the Census Bureau is doing now, but they were stationary. But due to COVID, we had to dramatically shift our outreach to more virtual and digital. And I know that many of you had already done some digital outreach with us through the recordings that we've pushed out through Facebook and Twitter. and through WhatsApp and other app portals that our communities use. But when COVID hit, we pretty much overnight shifted everything to virtual trainings, providing operational updates through Zoom, and then also sharing about how we can safely do in person through supporting outreach via messaging, updating the information, operation changes. There were a lot of changes there, not just the timeline, but when things were going to roll out too. Materials were translated in multiple languages, and currently we're distributing palm cards, hand sanitizers, and face masks, and working with local organizations, the Census Bureau and the Boston CCC, to bring in MQAs to these places where people are receiving support and gathering. Some of the support materials that we have available to you and to many of our organizations and partners are our digital toolkits, which do have digital graphics, not only for posting on social media, but ads and Bay State banner, ads and Sampan. We also have social media ads that you can also use and anyone can use. We do keep a daily response rate file, which I'll share a little bit about how we use it here shortly, and then work with mass counts on phone banking and text banking. So those are a few of the resources that we've provided. Now, as far as MIRA, we know that immigrants are a huge part of the population that are undercounted among the many other historically undercounted communities. But I just want to highlight it here that in Massachusetts, we're the 7th largest immigrant population here in the United States. And in Boston, you are the 5th highest immigrant population here in the state, with in the United States among the 23 largest US cities. So just looking at the ACS data, the current one, you have about 28.5% of the Boston population that are immigrant. So when we do look at the hard to count maps, one of the things that we look at is, where are historically undercounted communities living? And right now, 85% of the large immigrant populations across the state are well below the state wide response rate as of 8/20. Here in Boston, that's 74 tracks. That's a large amount. And if you're curious about it, we are happy to share with you what those tracks are, and also dig deeper into some of the demographics in these tracks and other tracks. And again, that is why we are keeping track of the daily response rates internally, and happy to share that with you. There was a question about the response rate, and as Jeff mentioned, the response rate is currently at 54.8% for Boston. When we look at what percentage comes from internet response, it's 85%.
Thank you so much, Vatsadi, and we'll come back for questions, but I just want to make sure we get through the panel.
Sure.
Thank you. Taniqua Hines from the ACLU, the Racial Justice Community Advocate.
Hi, awesome. Can everyone hear me? Oh, all right. I just wanted to flag that also Cheryl joined us a couple minutes ago for this panel, so just wanted to lift her up because I know she's excited to speak. Awesome, so I'll just get right into my testimony. So hi everyone, thank you so much for giving me and others who have been advocates for the census an opportunity to speak about it. And thank you so much, counselors, for bringing up this opportunity. I submit this testimony on behalf of the ACLU, as well as hard to count communities in Boston and across the state. My connection with the census goes back 10 years ago. I was 16 years old, the child of Jamaican immigrants living in Hartford, Connecticut. Like many immigrant parents, my mom would ask me, her child born in the US, who's more fluent in English and accustomed to American culture, to fill out forms and surveys for her. Some of the counselors and speakers here can relate to that and have mentioned that, as part of the first generation American experience. Imagine going to school and your teacher asking you to fill out a form and you return it back with your handwriting and your parent's signature, just a key experience. But 10 years ago, I filled out a survey that I did not yet comprehend the importance of, the 2010 census. As a 16-year-old, I thought this was just like any other form that I filled out before. Little did I know that I played a part in making sure that my Jamaican American household was counted in a city struggling to uplift its immigrant communities. If you told me then I would be an advocate for filling out this form, I would not believe you. Now I live in the Grove Hall neighborhood of Dorchester, the location of one of the lowest response rates in the state from the 2010 census. And currently my census tract response rate is about 49%. 10 years later, I tell my story to amplify the voices of other immigrant families in relation to the census. I didn't know what was at stake then, but it could not be clearer now. Every 10 years, the federal government conducts the census to count all the people in the United States. This is so fundamental to our democracy. You can't have a government by the people, of the people, and for the people unless you know who you are serving. At the core, the census is about amplifying our voice, the voices of our family, friends, and neighbors. The data from the census is also critical to determine resources and political representation for our communities, as many folks here have mentioned. Here in Massachusetts, there's about $16 billion in funding for childcare, affordable housing, hospitals, senior centers, language access, and so much more. In summary, this funding determines the livelihood of our communities from the youth to the older community for the next decade. The census also determines the political voice of our community, from City Hall to the State House and Congress. The demographic data from the census influences redistricting, or the process of drawing districts in which communities elect their local and national officials. The more accurate the census count, the more we are ensuring that people of color, immigrants, and other marginalized communities who have been historically excluded from political participation have the opportunity to elect officials who represent their needs. We witnessed this, like folks mentioned, through the election of Ayanna Pressley in the Congressional 7th District, majority-minority district that resulted from redistricting. This is someone who once served in this body who rose to a congressional seat through a response from the census and her powerful agenda that represents her diverse constituents. You may ask, if an accurate count for the census is so important, then why is the Trump administration so resistant to this? Because a government representative of people of color and immigrants is a threat to white supremacy. Last year, the Trump administration attempted to add a citizenship question to the census, and the National ACLU defeated the question in the courts. This past month, the administration continued to create obstacles for immigrants and hard to count communities by shortening the census by a month and issuing an unconstitutional memo to prevent the count of undocumented immigrants. These are the same communities that are hit hard by COVID-19, like folks have talked about, and need the resources that are determined by the census to recover from this pandemic for the next decade. As we continue to fight against these intimidation tactics, we know that our communities deserve an accurate count and a representative government. This is a classic example of what happens when our communities and our needs are not represented by elected officials. This is important now more than ever as we emerge from a summer of protests where Black and Brown communities are demanding accountability for police and law enforcement whose tough on crime approach does not address community needs. Meanwhile, police unions, chiefs, and a variety of law enforcement are attempting to water down police reform and accountability in our state legislature. But our community doesn't want more police or lack of accountability. We want access to housing, childcare, hospitals, language access, elderly care, schools, and fair political representation, all resources determined by the census. So consider this a call to action to our city council to uplift the census, the message of the census and its connection to your diverse communities that you serve. All the community organizations here can be a resource to you and your colleagues to reach out to your districts and keep them informed. The Trump administration wants to instill fear and increase mistrust in the government to prevent an accurate count. But it is time that our communities reclaim a new narrative through the census, that we are here, we will be heard, and we'll be counted. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Beth Huang, who's the director at the Mass Voter Table.
Hi, good morning. My name is Beth Huang, and I'm the executive director of the Massachusetts Voter Table, a coalition of 22 nonprofits that increase civic engagement in communities of color. We've convened the Mass Counts Coalition since Marathon Monday in 2018, that very blustery day, and have advised the Massachusetts Census Equity Fund, which has raised $1.2 million for nonprofit census efforts since September 2018. Thanks so much for inviting me to speak to these dockets. And I'd really like to thank the city, especially Sebastian Zapata, for your partnership on the 2020 census. As we know, this is a once in a decade opportunity for our communities to share who they are and what they need. The data from the 2020 census will determine what levels Boston's world-class research hospitals are funded, how many families will get Section 8 vouchers that provide a stable foundation for economic mobility, and how many kids will receive free and reduced lunch. This data will inform how many representatives Boston has in the State House delegation and the lines of political districts and school committees to congressional districts. This portrait of our communities may be incomplete. Even before the pandemic, Boston had the second highest proportion of its population in hard-to-count census tracts after Philadelphia. We have a large number of renters, immigrants, and students. Our demographics that make Boston a vibrant place to live also makes Boston a challenging city for a complete count. As we all may remember, Governor Baker declared the state of emergency on the afternoon of Tuesday, March 10th. The census self-response began on Thursday, March 12th. Our plans to turn multiple BPL branches, BCYF locations, and community-based organization offices into questionnaire assistance centers were absolutely no longer feasible. Congregations' plans to reach out to parishioners in hard-to-count census tracts were thrown out as churches tried to stay afloat. Community-based organizations that ran major outreach programs for previous decennial censuses were fielding hundreds of calls each day to assist workers file unemployment claims on a UI website that was only in English. And we've still managed to make 201,517 calls to residents of low response census tracts and sent 40,085 texts since March. We've had 18,982 conversations with residents about the 2020 census, and that includes 65,001 calls, 14,590 texts, and 6,136 conversations with Boston residents. Those numbers include so many of the efforts of community-based organizations that the city of Boston funded. Today, the response rate in Boston is 54.8%, about 10 percentage points behind the 64.4% response rate in 2010. As of the beginning of non-response follow-up on August 11th, the median census response rates of municipalities in Massachusetts is 71.5%. But the median response rate for municipalities in Massachusetts with the greatest number of COVID-19 cases per 100,000 was only 47.8%. That is a huge difference. And these patterns between higher income, lower COVID neighborhoods and lower income COVID-19 hotspots are absolutely reflected in the response rates in neighborhoods of Boston. Without a complete count, the portrait of Boston will be incomplete. I have two specific requests for city councilors today. So the first is based off of an open records request from early August, we found that the Secretary of the Commonwealth still has yet to allocate nearly $1.3 million from the Complete Count Grant Fund. This fund was supposed to provide $2.9 million to community-based organizations and $1 million to municipalities for census outreach. After we made this information from the open records request public, Secretary Galvin finally dispersed $50,000 to the city of Boston earlier this month, just 5% of the funds, despite having nearly 30% of the hard-to-count census tracts. The median census response rate for the 86 cities and towns eligible for this state funding is 56.9%. That is considerably lower than the 71.5% median in the state. We estimate that there's still 280,000 in funds for municipalities and over 980,000 for nonprofits. I ask that all of your offices request that the remaining funds be dispersed as soon as possible. The Secretary of State's Census Division received over $14 million in requests from nonprofits in December 2019. Clearly, many nonprofits have demonstrated greater need for capacity. My second request is similar to many others. It's to integrate the 2020 census into all of your communications with constituents. I really wanted to extend a thank you to Councilors Wu, Flynn, and Mejia for kicking off phone banks. I'm sorry if I'm missing anyone. We run weekly phone banks and have since March 12th. We run those on Tuesdays from 11 to 1, Wednesdays and Thursdays from 5 to 7. We also run text banks on Wednesdays from 4 to 5. If you have any of those super volunteers from your city council campaigns who can pitch in like it's GOTV all over again, we would really appreciate the help. Also, we really second all of the suggestions to stop by food pantries and request mobile questionnaire assistance operations from the Census Bureau. Their partnership specialists have been excellent throughout this entire effort. Please send out information about the census in your newsletters and any other digital communications. And I was really impressed by the Knock Across Boston for COVID-19 in the spring. I don't know whether that's possible to do for the 2020 census. We have just 40 days to get out the count. We need every dollar, every volunteer, and more. Thanks so much for your work and attention to this issue. It's really time to accelerate our efforts, and we look forward to your continued partnership. Thanks so much for having us today.
Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to open it up to questions from the counselors. We have another panel right after this with 6 folks on it. So I want to make sure that folks know that we're probably going to only do 1 round here. So if you do have questions, please raise your blue hand. I see Councilor Braden has her hand raised, and so I'm going to go to Councilor Braden.
Mr. Chair, I think my question has been answered by Beth's excellent presentation just now. So I, in the interest of time, just keep going. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Councilor Flynn.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councilor Arroyo, and thank you to the panelists for your outstanding work on this important issue. As I was listening to the debate, a friend of mine from the Ford Point neighborhood, Tom Reddy, asked me a question, and I just wanted to see if anyone would want to take a chance at answering it. You know, listening to the census hearing, is there anything to prevent pop-up census teams in identified undercounted census tracts at polling locations on September 1st? Basically, could they set up a team outside of a voting location to encourage people as they leave the voting location to complete the census in certain areas? Just wanted to throw that out there if anyone had any comments.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I think that the MQA operations is in the purview of the Census Bureau. It is a good idea because there'll be a large amount of folks coming to vote. Hopefully they can also vote by mail. But again, that would be up to the Census Bureau.
Okay, and then finally, I just wanted to highlight, I know I mentioned it before at the start, but Cheryl Crawford, I was listening to you on the radio this morning, 102.9, talking about this important issue, and the advice you had to the residents that were listening was very good. Just an outline of why it's so important to complete the census, especially for our immigrant neighbors, low-income families, our seniors, communities of color, persons with disabilities. What happens in Washington, is critical, but having an accurate census count really determines how much federal funding we are getting into our city and state, especially helping people and families in need. So I want to say thank you to Cheryl for her work on this issue for many years. And that's all I have, Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. And I'm just going to give it a second really quick to see. I see no other hands. So if anybody has anything, speak now or forever hold your peace. All right. So I just want to thank everybody for your testimony. It was excellent and informative. I appreciate it. And I just want to say that I think every counselor would open their doors to you if you wanted to call and ask for any resources in our particular districts or any kind of support. So thank you again. And with that, I'm going to go to the next panel, which is comprised of Cheryl Crawford, who's the Executive Director at Mass Vote, Pastor Kiki Florissant, who's a member of the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization and the Haitian American United, Fatima Ali Salam, who's the chair at the Greater Mattapan Neighborhood Council, Manilo Mendez, who's a community organizer at NOAA, Jelena Suggs, and again, if I mispronounce your name, please do correct me, Director of Networks at Union Capital Boston, and Bernardo Diaz de Magalhaes. I should pronounce that better since I'm Puerto Rican, but we'll see what we can do there. Brazilian Women's Group. And so with that, I'm going to go to Cheryl Crawford at Mass Vote.
Thank you, Chairman Arroyo, for calling this hearing today, as well as the rest of City Council for offering your insight into this pivotal issue. I am Cheryl Clyburn Crawford, the Executive Director of Mass Vote, a voting rights and issue advocacy organization with the mission to increase voter turnout, modernize election laws, and engage the next generation of leaders. 64.4%. That is the response rate to the 2020 census for the state of Massachusetts. That stands above the national rate of about 64%. Yet, as many have already noted today, the response rate remains much lower in Boston, just about 55%. The downward trend does not end there, though. In parts of Dorchester, for example, the rate is about 42%, in Mattapan, 48%, and in parts of Roxbury, it's 36%. 36%, with just over 1 month until the Census Bureau ceases operations. We have no shortage of work to do. We need to do absolutely everything in our power to get out the count in Boston. A year ago, we would have told you that doing this, getting out the count, would be difficult. The anxiety and uncertainty around whether or not there would be a citizenship question on the census distracted from all the benefits that would come from completing the census. But we never would have expected the level of difficulty we face now, because we did not expect the one thing that has impacted every single one of us, the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has limited our ability and the ability of advocacy organizations from across the state to hold in-person get out the count events. It has limited the ability of the Census Bureau to conduct in-person counting. It has limited our ability to help everyone understand why the census matters. All of these limitations were amplified on August 3rd, when, as you know, the Census Bureau announced that they would be ceasing their operations 1 month early. The president's recent push to leave undocumented immigrants outside the census count only adds to the difficulties. We are deeply, deeply frustrated by these decisions and are closely monitoring any and all legal actions as they proceed. But we are focused on one thing. In these last 40 days, we need to make sure that our census count is as accurate and inclusive as possible. We need to make sure that the count is as accurate and inclusive as possible because of the immense impact that the census has on our everyday lives. As a result of its census count, Boston receives as much as $120 million in federal aid. That includes Title I school funding, special education grants, Head Start funding, and community development grants. These programs prove critical during normal times, whatever normal means, but are especially crucial amid the COVID-19 crisis. Students must continue receiving reliable food sources as well as sound education. Residents must receive affordable housing protections. Everyone must be able to travel safe, reliable roads. Getting the census count right is crucial to all of these. Any undercount can jeopardize these resources, but that is not the only reason that the count must be as accurate and inclusive as possible. For those that stand to gain the most from such a count stand to lose the most if the count remains low. In the one Dorchester neighborhood we mentioned earlier, where the census self-response rate stands at about 42%, approximately 83% of residents are people of color. In that same neighborhood, about 50% of residents live below or near the poverty line. In that same neighborhood, about 76% of the residents are renters. Communities of color, low-income communities, renters, all these communities suffered inequalities and inequities prior to the COVID-19 outbreak. And as we well know, the COVID-19 outbreak has exacerbated these inequalities and inequities. But by getting the census count right, we will take a key step to providing these communities with the resources they deserve. It may not be a big step, though it is necessary a step that we have to take. Again, I wish to thank the counselor for discussing this issue today and know that you will join us in making the census count as accurate and inclusive as possible. With only 40 days remaining, we have no time to waste. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Pastor Flores-Sant.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Chairman Arroyo, my district councilor, and all the councilors, and thank you also all the distinguished advocacy groups that are here to talk about this crucial and important issue, which is the census. I'm sorry, just my phone is ringing. I'm at work, so as you can understand. I just want to also thank the city of Boston. Sebastian was here for providing some resources through their resiliency fund in order to allow us to deliver some food to our elderly. At the same time, we're able to push also the education and the outreach for the census. We want to thank also our elected officials also that showed up into our town halls on a weekly basis, basically to promote the census, and all our partners, Mira Coalition, that stand with us in that effect. As you know, just ethnic communities basically facing difficult situations. As you know, COVID presents its unique challenges, but we also have immigration. We also have a cultural mistrust of communities regarding the government. So we have a lot to do. But we thank God for Dr. Gabo, Joel Gabo, couldn't be here because she's still serving the kids, serving almost 245 kids throughout the summer. She is the board member for HAU, as well as also the executive director for Immigrant Family Service Institute. She's the one who's collaborating with all Haitian organizations, not only in Boston, but only throughout the greater Boston. As a matter of fact, throughout the New England area, because she's connecting with the Haitian Pastors Association of New England to promote the census and all the Haitian organizations. We're so thrilled last year, basically, to continue talking about the census. We know the benefits and the resources that our communities will be benefited from it. We're present at all galas, concerts, revivals, but COVID-19 had to put a stop into this, but that didn't stop us from continuing on during the outreach. We have several coordinators that's work with us in that aspect, going into the Haitian media and Haitian radio, because this is how our community gets their news, through Haitian radio and Haitian media. So we're able to do that. But also we're bringing other legal organizations to talk about other subjects affecting the immigrant communities, such as public charge, as Vatsadi alluded to, such as Lawyers for Civil Rights, basically that represent HAU into the lawsuit against the administration for saying that they will not count undocumented. So every weekend we organize a town hall, and it goes through since May, throughout our Haitian Heritage Month, it's going through. But the challenges that we are still facing, the fear among those undocumented immigrants, because we have people making phone calls. When they're making phone calls, will my information be shared? And thank you, Sebastian. We just trying to informing them and educating them. Their information will be kept confidential. And the second challenges that we are facing, that we want the councilors to be part of it, I believe that Beth alluded to it, is the financial resources. As you know, the first resources we had went through the month of June, and the fact that we had to continue on to do the outreach at the same time also going into the radio as well as Haitian TVs, that's created hurdles for us to be able to continue to do the work. But it is essential for community of colors to continue to educate the immigrants about the benefits of the census, because it seems that some of them still don't quite understand and aware why it is so important, especially the undocumented, knowing that their votes might not be counted. But I'm glad that you organized this. It's just really to defray the fear and also to disseminate powerful information to us as immigrants advocates groups, just to go out there and continue do the work. Thank you for having me, and I'm staying just to take some questions if you have some. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Florissant. Fatima Ali Salam, who's the chair at the Greater Mattapan Neighborhood Council.
Hi, thank you, Councilor Arroyo. Good morning, everyone. My name is Fatima Ali Salam. I'm the chair for Greater Mattapan Neighborhood Council. As such, Greater Mattapan has been spoken before. We have a below 50% count rate at the moment. One of the challenges, of course, the biggest one has been the pandemic. And what happened is that I myself, it's just the sheer number of people that have passed away. I myself know 25 people who passed away from the virus. And there are others who have similar stories. But in spite of that, the challenge, physically not being able to meet with people because we had spaces, public spaces to which we were able before, and we had set up with groups who actually were the demographics of hard to count. People who, young people, people who were from lower income households to actually do the work. We were going to hire them. As such, we had to do a shift. We were still able to, right now, in this last 40 days, what we're doing is that we were able to use our funding in order to get some handmade masks, to which one side has the Greater Mattapan Neighborhood Council logo, and on the other side, the U.S. Census. We've gone and talked about them. They've become now collector's items. And there are 1,000 of them handmade by a local company, minority owned. We're also working with Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition's Vigorous Youth Group to create a public service announcement in both English and in Haitian Creole. And those are going to be going out, and they're going to be working with us every week for the last month to actually get the word out locally, because we realize that the teens are actually very active and they can do some miraculous things with social media and are much more adept than others at it. Some of the other things that people have talked about, of course, we've had on our website, and the census information from the beginning in all the different languages. Going to food sites, of course, has also been a big boon, because in Mattapan, it's the Mildred Ave Elementary School location. Initially, we saw that it was not being used, and we asked that it actually be used as a site to collect, to help people to fill out the census. One thing, though, that we did do is actually have a sit-down session online with young people to actually show them, because they didn't believe it, even though they were told. We went through every question in order to show them that there was no question about citizenship. And it came up because a teenager said, well, I just don't believe you. And we had to go through and actually show them, walk through this. Oh, well, now I believe you. So, you know, until they see it, they don't believe it. And that was how we realized that we had to do even more work to actually fight the perception that everyone has been speaking about, that that citizenship question is going to come up because of the fear throughout communities that have majority immigrants. So that's basically what our big push is, and other things, of course, that everyone else has already been speaking about. I don't want to take up more time since we have limited time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and sorry for your loss, and if anybody's listening to this, and I'm sure there are people listening to this who have lost folks, sorry to you as well. My thoughts are with everybody in this time. Manilo Mendez, the community organizer at NOAA.
Is my mic working?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank the city and all the councilors and Sebastian for your support to our communities. And Sebastian has been working very close to all of these groups with this effort about the census. East Boston, wow. So, and thank you, UCB. We did almost 1,000 phone calls with their help also. locally here in East Boston, and we did, you know, and a lot of those calls result in families filling the census. We got a lot of calls back to NOAA saying that thank you for reminding, and then also asking us for help filling the form. So we had volunteers, and so our focus has been walking on the streets and having tables in different parts of East Boston, including tables at Central Square, Maverick Square, and the Farmers Market. We produce local videos with a message from Councilor Edwards, State Rep. Adrian Madaro, and Veronica Robles promoting the census with the community. And also for 2 months, we were at the radio program with Veronica Robles, and at the same time, Facebook Live with different community activists giving the message about the census and how important it is. So this is being also, Sebastian, I think Sebastian was in one of those programs. We also, I know I've been working very close in coordinating efforts with Pedro Angel from the Census Bureau. He's been a big help here in East Boston. He's been like a couple of times working with us in a table, and we've been using tablets. So we have in our tables, we have tablets to make people, to ask people if they haven't filled the census, they can do it right there on site. And that's a big thing. Some people feel more comfortable doing it, filling it in front of us with our support if they have any questions. So that's helped us a lot here in East Boston. And also we've been working the census, the food distribution. The different, in East Boston, there's like probably 5 or 6 food distribution centers. And we've been in those lines talking to people, promoting with people, giving them little gifts like you know, bandanas, we have little bags. So people's been happy working with us. And a lot of depends how you approach them, how do you know them and understand them. That, you know, so you have to really get into them to trust you. And okay, you know, let me see that tablet again and help me if I cannot do it. And yes, people do it, but you have to get into them. If they open the door at you, you have to trust them and be trust and talk to about a common language. They do it, but there's a lot of people that are still afraid of where that information is going. And, you know, I'm afraid of filling and sending the census. So that's a lot still with a lot of families. We also encounter about a lot of people that live and rent a room in a household. And so they don't know if they can fill the census by themselves. And they don't know if the family in charge of that apartment is going to take them in consideration when they fill the census, you know? So that's another thing that, so do you feel, is the family in charge of the apartment fill the census and they count on you? Or if not, do you fill the census by yourself as renting a room? That's another situation that we encounter. A lot of people living in a room by themselves and don't know if they were counted already with the family. So, and I know the person from the census is not here anymore, but you know, I've been with them a couple of times here in Central Square, and the 2 census takers were not from the area, didn't know the area, and one of them were bilingual, but the other not, only English. That's a very hard work to do, at least in East Boston, maybe in other areas of Boston, but in East Boston, we really need census takers to be bilingual and, you know, at least understand or know a little the area or our culture of the community, because that's you break the barrier. That's how you break the barrier and let the community come to you and talk to you, trust you, to fill in the census.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mendez. Ms. Suggs, Director of Networks at Union Capital Boston.
Yes, thank you. Hi, all. I'm Jelena Suggs, Director of Networks at Union Capital Boston. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you all for being here this morning. I want to introduce Union Capital Boston briefly, and then also give a summary of our work over the past few months. So, founded in 2014, Union Capital Boston's mission is to transform social capital into opportunity by rewarding community engagement. Our innovative approach combines technology and relationship building to strengthen neighborhood networks, build social capital, and create pathways of opportunity for individuals and community in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, and East Boston. The UCB mobile app aggregates hundreds of cross-sector resources into one searchable calendar. Over 2,250 members use our tool to find new opportunities, log their engagement in the app, and earn financial rewards for the time they commit, now totaling over $1 million in earned rewards. We partner with schools, health centers, housing programs, and community organizations to sign up their members and stipend network leaders from these institutions to support their members. We train leaders to host over 75 community network nights a year. Now on Zoom, our gatherings are a space to build trust, exchange resources, and spark social capital. Our original plan was to begin our census phone banking at Urban Edge, along with outreach at the Jackson Square T Station on March 16th, the Monday the city shut down. Through the help of our partners, Urban Edge, Nuestra Comunidad, NOAA, Common Square NDC, East Boston Neighborhood Health Center, and the East Boston Social Center, we quickly shifted online. I worked to coordinate contact spreadsheets and send call lists to over 75 UCB volunteers who then returned notes to me of confirmed census completions to be entered into our tracking spreadsheet. We also sent frequent census information blasts to our thousands of members and shared on our social media platforms in order to dispel myths and message the power of census completion. Between March and now, we have been able to confirm over 2,200 Boston households completed the census, which we can say translates to over 8,000 individuals being counted and over $20 million of federal funding allocated to our Boston neighborhoods. Some challenges we faced in the process were being remote and distant, having to exchange information with volunteers via email and the coordination it takes to do so, knowing that email isn't everyone's preferred form of communication, but with scripts, census outreach, protocols, practices, the best way to share that information. And in general, the fear and response, folks being hesitant to respond to volunteers, giving them a call, what they're going to be doing with this information, as many have mentioned tonight or this morning. Listen, sorry. Whoa. Oh, I just switched so many different languages there. Over time, I was able to focus on working with our consistent cohort of volunteers, excited to be cranking out lists. So I was really thankful for that. One volunteer confirming over 250 census household completions herself. So a champion in that. We'll continue to share important census information with our membership in the weeks to come, especially as more MQAs become available, as many of us have asked for and called for their importance in being visible and present in different community spaces. And we learned we'll have to be creative with how to orchestrate voter outreach calls as we look towards the fall and doing that outreach and that civic engagement. So thank you all for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you so much. And our final panelist, Bernardo from the Brazilian Women's Group.
Hello, everyone. Thank you again. I'll be very briefly. I'm Bernardo Magalhães. I'm from the Brazilian Women's Group. It's a nonprofit organization. It's celebrating 25 years this year. And basically, the goal is to help any immigrant who comes to Boston, and especially Brighton, where we are located. And we've been working with Census since last year, trying to explain and educate people about how important it is. And the main problem was the language. So we have to translate everything in Portuguese, and Portuguese for Portuguese speakers. And we start having the participation in Facebook Lives vary like once a month with the specialist partnership. which is Brazilian. And we start to giving like this first education to the people and telling them how important it is. And after that, we concentrated to use the Facebook, social medias as Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. You're trying to understand and made strategies to connect with and reach Brazilian and Portuguese speakers, no? And when the pandemic started, we have to change the strategy and be way more aggressive on those platforms. So we started to design a lot of materials, graphic materials to post and introduce, and we started to try to show the hard to come areas, not only in Boston, but in all the cities that you see and you find immigrants. And you try to show them graphically. After that, we show the numbers and to make like more like competition between the cities. And we starting to do like radio shows, advertisement in newspapers and online and all kinds of information to bring to where you can touch the Brazilian and the Portuguese speakers community. And when the pandemic came, we started doing Facebook Lives every single day. So people are very used to you know, at 8:30 in Boston to listen to all kinds of problems, not only immigrant issues, but also information about the census, and invite people, normal people, immigrants, doctors, any kind of subjects are, you know, we try to speak there. So it's a way to engage, and people are getting very used to that. And that is being very helpful. And you're sharing to them the questionnaire and how easy it is and the importance of that. The biggest challenge was from the beginning was, and still it is the fear to answer it. And I should not answer that. I'm invisible. I don't have a voice in this country. Basically, those are the things that you heard. So since July, we started to do food donation, and we found that it's sad because people are very willing to have food and money, and they come. And at the time, you're starting to talk about the census to the people, giving masks, and we invite the mobile questionnaire, the questionnaire, the census taker to the food donation. It was very helpful. A lot of people start to answer after that on the line. And it's sad because you have the food as the main source to, you know, to talk, but it was good because you give more education and information to the people when they feel more comfortable answering. And after, you also have all the data and phone. And so the people are not comfortable answer at the time or say that they already answer it. So we call them later and ask if they already signed the census and give the numbers and all the information. So basically it's what we've been done all this time and helping people to be more informative about the census. That's what we've been doing and keep doing until the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, for your work. I want to note that Council President Janey is with us. I'd like to give her a moment to speak on the floor. And if you have any questions, you can use it as well.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm still in commuting and it's really noisy out here. I've been trying to listen in and I really appreciate all of the community organizations who are helping in this effort, but I'm gonna just hold back and continue to listen just because it's too noisy.
I appreciate you being with us. Thank you so much. Anybody have questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask them. I'll give us time for that. We do have folks in public comment waiting to do public comment, so I want to make sure that we respect their time if they're waiting. Councillor Flynn, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chair Arroyo. And I wanted to ask Cheryl Crawford if she could respond or provide a little bit of background information on the importance of the census, but also kind of reflecting on the upcoming redistricting, reprecincting, and what impact, if any, the census has on redrawn legislative districts or redrawn congressional districts as well. That information might be helpful. Just wanted to see if there's any information you knew about that, Cheryl.
Absolutely. The census is really critical. We always talk about the resources that it brings to our community, but what it also does is it informs the redistricting, right? Like this is about population and how do we build communities of color and build power within those communities? How do, right? And so with the census, this is why it's just absolutely critical that we get a complete count on the census. So that we know where folks are. So when they start drawing the lines, we're able to draw out communities like communities, right? People that with language barriers or not just language barriers, but you know, they want to be together because of their language or because of some of the sources and things that they're doing in their neighborhoods, right? But the census absolutely informs those numbers. We're talking about building power within communities, the same way we were able to build the Congressional District 7, because that was a direct result of census, the way they drew the lines, redistricting, re-precincting, all of that matters. We've been pushing for re-precincting for a while now because we really feel like, and we really want a full re-precincting. We've been able to split wards, not wards, but precincts so that we don't have overcrowdedness and things of that nature happening. But what we really need, honestly, is to take a look at the wards, right? Like, I don't know why we have this issue about re-precincting and drawing outside the wards. Maybe it's time for us to take a look and redraw the wards so that they better reflect the way that the population is shifting. Right? Like, and census helps us identify where people are. People are being forced out of the city of Boston because they can't afford it. But we still need to know where people are going. The census helps us track folks as well. But it is absolutely critical we get a complete count so that it can truly inform the redistricting process.
Thank you. Thank you, Cheryl. And I have no further comments, Councilor Arroyo. I just want to say thank you to you, my colleagues, but especially to the panelists for providing excellent comments, but also more importantly for their work on this critical issue.
And I would echo those thanks. Thank you so much for the work you've done. I think we're going to wrap it here. So I'm going to give Councilor Braden an opportunity to speak.
I'll keep it very brief. Thank you so much to all of the folks who came and testified this morning. There's some really useful and valuable information. We've got 40 days left. Hopefully we can mobilize and increase the count number in the next 40 days. Thank you. This is a critical time and a hugely important issue. So thank you all.
Thank you again for all the work you're doing. And please do reach out to our offices if you need help on any resources or any kind of drive that you're trying to do. Please do reach out to us and make sure that we're engaged and involved, because I know all of us know how important this census is. So thank you all again. With that, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. My appreciation to all of you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you.